Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. Today's presentation is called Cultural Humility in Counseling Hispanic and Latino Populations. My name is Misty Story, and I'm the Director of Training for NADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals, and I will be your organizer for today's event, so welcome. Before we get started, I just want to review a few of our housekeeping items, and this will let you know how you can best participate in today's webinar. The tool we're using today is called GoToWebinar, and the GoToWebinar control panel that you see on the right of your screen can be minimized and expanded by pressing the orange arrow. Doing this will allow you to see your entire screen during the presentation, and you can always reopen it by pressing the orange arrow again. This presentation is being recorded, and we will post it on our website for later viewing, and I'll try to send you a link to this recording later today if everything goes as planned, so keep your fingers crossed for that. And all attendees for the live broadcast have entered in listen-only mode. This means that your microphones are muted, so we will not be able to hear you during the presentation. However, you have the ability to send questions to our staff or to the presenter through the questions pane during the presentation. You can simply type in your question and click send. But due to time restraints, we will not be able to answer your questions live during the presentation, but we will collect your questions and post answers on our website. If you're using your computer speakers to listen in today and are having trouble getting the volume higher, I recommend switching to a telephone line. I have no control over the volume output, but this switch seems to solve most problems. Also during the presentation, you'll be asked to participate in some audience polling questions. To respond, simply click on the answer of your choice that will be on your screen at that time. If you wish to download the PowerPoint slides for today's presentation, you can do so from the website that's on your screen now, and you can always locate the materials for this webinar by visiting the NADAC Webinars homepage at www.nadac.org/webinars, and then locating the title of today's presentation. You can do that with all of our archived and live event webinars that are on our site. Today's webinar is produced by NADAC, the Association for Addiction Professionals, in collaboration with Orion Healthcare Technology. And the education delivered in today's webinar is free to all professionals. If you wish to receive CE credit for participating, you must pass the online CE quiz that is located at either address that's on your website on your screen now. And 1.5 CEs are free to NADAC members and subscribers to Acculturation who participate in this webinar. And then non-members of NADAC and non-subscribers of Acculturation receive 1.5 CEs for $20. And so this includes everyone, those who are logged in today for the live event, as well as those who have downloaded the archive version. Either way, you're eligible to receive CE credit for participating in this webinar. After you pass the online CE quiz, a certificate of completion will be emailed to you within 21 days of submission, although we try to do it much quicker than that. So just to be crystal clear, successfully passing the CE quiz is the only way to receive a CE certificate. We don't do the process any other different way. So as a result of participating in today's webinar, you'll be able to do many things. So first, you can gain some knowledge and understanding of the characteristics and demographics of the Hispanic and Latino population. You'll be able to gain a better understanding of barriers to treatment and cultural-related issues for Hispanic and Latinos seeking substance use disorder treatment. And then you'll also be able to become more knowledgeable in the cultural elements as they relate to treatment and implications in working with Hispanics and Latinos. So as you can see, we've got a lot we're going to be covering today together in the next 90 minutes. So with that said, let me just tell you a bit about our presenter today. Victor Flores possesses a master's degree in counseling with an undergraduate degree in sociology. His experience has allowed him to be in various positions within many systems, including courts, behavioral health, and other nonprofit organizations. He possesses a license from the Arizona Board of Behavioral Health Examiners and delivers services in Arizona. The services are responsive to the culture and linguistic needs of those he serves. So NADAC is so delighted to have Victor with us today. So without further ado, Victor, if you're ready, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Misty. I appreciate it. I always like doing these kinds of events, trainings. It's just something that is something that I really appreciate being able to do and share. And one of the things that has me here today is that we've been doing a lot of this work with working with Hispanics and Latinos, and my background actually lends itself to a lot of the stuff, not just because my background is one where I have been I'm an immigrant to the U.S., but I've been here most of my life, and I became a U.S. citizen, naturalized at age 20. So that's quite a while ago. And one of the things in the human service field is that I've been in this field for about 29 to 30 years at many levels. And one of those things that I always look at is some of the stuff that I've taken with me, whether I've worked with the courts, the different state systems, or even with community-based systems. I'm currently a practitioner still within the field, and do services in English and Spanish. So those are some of the things. But within the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC, Addiction Technology and Transfer Center network, what I do is I specialize in this area as a trainer in preparing the workforce for the work that we do. So just getting started with that information, I think that some of that that is a valuable piece of information in starting this work and remaining in it. A lot of you are here because this is an area that sometimes is what we know to be in need of professional development for every one of us, whether we're from a particular group or whether we're just saying, hey, this is a population that's really growing in the region where I reside, whether it's in the West Coast or East Coast of the U.S., wherever it may be. I reside in Arizona, and from here is where I do the services, but I travel all over the U.S. doing a number of things. And part of today's discussion actually comes from the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC, as we do a lot of trainings in many areas with Hispanics and Latinos, which include working with families, delivering services in gang areas, working with LGBTQ populations, working within the cultural elements. So we've been doing a number of things, and the majority of today's presentation has been extrapolated from a curriculum called the cultural elements in working with Hispanics and Latinos, and that's something that we derived from the Hispanic initiative in 2005. So one of the things that we want to make sure is that we cover this information. And to get started with some of the slides here, some of the pieces that are super important are when we start talking about Hispanics and Latinos, you keep on hearing me say Hispanic, Latino interchangeably. Well, there's a number of reasons for that. One of the things that I always kind of emphasize is in the 1970s, the government established Hispanic as a word of choice for people of Spanish origin. But then it wasn't until like 1997 or so that the word Latino was adopted as well, because on the western part of the U.S. that term was widely used as well. So it's more of a preference more than anything, but it's about counting people from a particular group, and that's really something that's super important to make sure that we are getting the numbers correct when it comes to tracking growth, tracking needs, all those pieces that are just crucial. Part of my background is having worked for a Regional Behavioral Health Authority, or REBA, within the behavioral health system, and tracking these kinds of numbers because they are important when it comes to service delivery. Part of the Census and Bureau also is that Hispanic and Latinos, it's represented, when we use this word, it represent an ethnicity, which is different from the race category. So when we're talking about Hispanic, Latino, we're talking about persons of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South and Central American backgrounds, and that's important. We're not yet talking about the races, because the races are part of every piece of this group. So a lot of it has to do with language. A lot of it has to do with ethnicity. One of the things that we always look at is health equity. And currently, individuals from various backgrounds are unable to attain the highest level of health due to a number of reasons. There's social determinants of health. There's conditions in which people were born, in which they grew, in which they work, and their age, socioeconomic status. All these pieces contribute to health equity and whether people are attaining the highest level of health possible. That brings me to health disparities. You know, when we talk about the impact of some of the people who have had systematically experienced greater obstacles based on their race, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, age, mental health, etc. These are the kinds of things that come up when we're talking about health disparities. You know, the differences in incidence, prevalence, mortality, burden of diseases are something that's among specific population groups distinct. So that's why health disparities is such an incredibly important issue. As we continue to talk about this, there's a goal, according to Healthy People 2020, the goal is to attain the highest level of health for all people by really getting rid of those things that I just discussed and addressing them, by being able to deliver services, not just appropriately, but quality services to kind of even the playing field, if you will. Some of the information that we receive regarding the youngsters in the field is that when we start looking at percentages and ages, we look at the offset of Hispanics 12 years and older engaging in drug use, and what we know about this population is it's very young. We're getting a younger population that's just increasing in numbers, but also going in places in the United States that aren't your typical places. In the past, you used to talk about the Southwest, the West. You used to talk about different places that were the typical Arizona, California, Texas. But as we've seen with the migration patterns, the population is exploding in non-traditional places like the South, like the North, the places that we weren't typically seeing. As a result, we're seeing this younger population growth, and we're also seeing a lack of services. When it comes to disparities, we start talking about the lack of representation in the fields of medicine, nursing, social work, and as a result, we start saying, okay, how can we interest some professionals so that they will be looking at this field as something positive, and so that they can come? Because one of the things that we do as administrators in this field is that we're looking for how do we get people that are qualified, that are competent, that are responsive to the needs of those that we're serving. And as a result, when we don't find those people, we have the access is hindered by the fact that a significant number of Hispanics and Latinos are uninsured. And part of that has to do a lot with outreach, engagement, connection. All those things actually impact. So as you can see, everything is very much interrelated. When we start looking at the different pieces of access, as I was talking about engagement, outreach, you know, we start seeing the reduced access, the low retention rates, the community strategies that aren't effective. So as a result, we start looking at these pieces and saying, okay, where are we missing the boat? Where are we really doing well? You know, one of the things when it comes to outreach and engagement that I oftentimes would look at if I was monitoring a system or monitoring what an agency was or was not doing, was how are you outreaching? Where are you located? If a particular group is located in a particular part of the city, questions like, are there bus lines? Are there main streets nearby? Is this a place that's accessible to those that we are targeting? Those kinds of questions would be asked. So those kinds of things are very important. Once in the particular environment, in the particular agency or organization, is it welcoming? Is it appropriate? Is it taking into consideration all these pieces of making sure that this particular target group is accessing services? So those kinds of things are crucial. So when we have a mismatch between, you know, what is there and what is needed, that's when we start missing the target. So it doesn't make sense in the city that I live. It doesn't make sense to have the perfect clinic on the north side of this large city when the majority of the people that are accessing services are from the south side. So those kinds of things are really places that need to be looked at. One of the things that we have looked at is the Office of Minority Health and CLAS standards, the cultural and linguistically appropriate services. And just as a information piece, the CLAS standards were developed by the Office of Minority Health in 2000. And during this time, they saw a need to really get these guides or guidelines out there and did so. And once they were developed, they were divided into categories of mandates, recommendations, and guidelines. And as a result, a lot of human service agencies, entities, decided to adopt these and use them as part of their cultural proficiency or cultural competency plans. And they do serve a great purpose because they have every piece you can imagine around culture, all around linguistics, around those pieces that are just important when it comes to delivering services in a way that's effective. And one of the things with the CLAS standards was that in 2013, the enhanced CLAS standards were put forth by the Office of Minority Health, and part of that meant that they updated them. They were updated, and they were again placed into different themes. And as a result, the Office of Minority Health in early 2013 did this, and the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC, we gave a webinar to make sure that this was something that other entities and all entities that were human service serving would be abreast of. One of the things about the CLAS standards is that there is a principal standard. And the principal standard, as you can see, provide effective, equitable, understandable, and respectful quality care and services that are responsive to the diverse cultural health beliefs and practices, preferred languages, health, literacy, and other communication needs. And what's really the reason this is significant is because as we start talking about the broader themes, you'll see that one's on governance, one's on communication, one's engagement. But the premise is if all standards are adopted, implemented, and maintained, the main standard, which was the first one, the principal standard, is achieved. So that's just an important piece. And what we know, and I'm talking about cultural competence in general, but it's really inclusive of all groups. But I am focusing today on Hispanics and Latinos. And I just think it's so important when we start talking about culture in general that we start talking in a broad sense, and then kind of pinpoint particular situations where we might be a little more detailed and maybe a little bit more specialty. So when it comes to talking about culture, you know, there's just so many meanings and definitions when it comes to culture. And some people say, well, culture is something that's different for every person, and there's not just one definition. Well, I agree. No, there isn't. And we've used all kinds of definitions. And one of the ones that really catches my attention, again, it's from the Office of Minority Health. And if I may, the integrated patterns of human behavior that include the language, thoughts, communication, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of racial, ethnic, religious, or social groups. I like that. It just kind of captures a lot of pieces. But I've used other definitions. This is just one that I thought would be good for today's presentation as I go forward and talk about how this is relating and resonating for me. You know, acculturation, we usually talk about the A words, acculturation and assimilation, when we are talking about culture. And one of the things that we oftentimes talk about when it comes to acculturation, as you can see the bullet points there, you know, it's about adopting the beliefs and behaviors of another group. And some people say, well, how is that different from assimilation? Well, the way, you know, I always have to simplify things, at least for myself. And I know that for acculturation, for me, it means how do we maintain a piece of what we already bring to the table within the host or the larger group? How do we maintain that piece that we bring? And I always think about my kids that are first generation, or even their kids that will be second generation American, if you will. What will they maintain? Will they have piñatas when they're you know, a couple of generations out? Will they still have piñatas and stuff like that that we grew up with and have always? Will that still occur? And I say that's somewhat of a process, or a very tangible acculturation piece. So that's something I would definitely start looking at. So again, okay, reciprocity. The dominant group also adopts patterns typical to the minority group. So we see that. I can't tell you how many times, speaking of piñatas, I have seen the majority group, if you will, doing piñatas, especially here in the Southwest. I repeat, I'm in Arizona. So one of the things when it comes to acculturation is that we talk about how an individual relates to their own group, what they retain from their particular group. Again, I mentioned my own personal situations and how we become accustomed to keeping some of those pieces. And I know that, and again, another tangible piece and example, my son, who was born here and is extremely proud to be Mexican American, will oftentimes put up the different pieces of identifiers in his room, whether it's the Mexican national team jersey or the American national team jersey for soccer, and those kinds of things. So those kinds of things, again, acculturation has a lot to do with the individual and how they relate to their own group as a subgroup. And when it comes to, I think we are going to do polling questions. Is that correct? I believe so. There we go.
Hi, Victor. The polling question is live.
Okay. So which of these can be a common barrier for Hispanics, Latinos in relation to treatment access and adherence? Language, location, immigration status, all of the above. Very good. one of the things that just by looking at those polling questions, and if usually I'm not the most savvy to be the poller or the one that polls the question here, but that's great. Almost everybody got that. I saw 97%, and I think that is so important to look at those pieces, because oftentimes when we start talking about these kinds of issues, especially with the Hispanic and Latino group, we're talking about those issues that either have been a barrier or could be a barrier. And as you can see, almost everybody has a good concept of the things that sometimes within this group we can bump up against. When it comes to assimilation, I think it's important to take into consideration that the focus is on the group rather than on the individual, and on how minority or immigrant groups relate to the dominant or host culture. I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about assimilation. And how do we blend in? You know, one of the things that oftentimes I was told is how do you just immerse? When we reached this country, my family, we didn't speak any English, and one of the things we had to do was just sink or swim for us, and learn the language and just see where you can go from there. And you bet we took it upon ourselves. But sometimes, depending on where you are in life, I was a child, and I was able to assimilate in terms of language very quickly, and because I was a child. But my older relatives were my mom and dad. They never learned English. They learned a couple of words, but it was a bit more difficult. So assimilation sometimes to the dominant culture is not as easy as people might believe it is. So it's just somewhat of an informational piece when it comes to that. So when we talk about Americanization, because that's a very real thing, it's a very real thing. What does that mean? What does that mean? Because there's a lot of ideas about what Americans are around the nation, and I mean around the world, and things like that. I consider myself very American, very Americanized, and even though again I hold on to my Mexican background, actually I have dual citizenship, but part of that what I do pay attention to is, you know, Americanization for me describes the influence of the U.S. on the culture of other countries, and I think that sometimes we see it and it's pretty clear, but other times it's not as clear. Also, how when it comes to Americanization, how immigrants in the U.S. How the immigrant in the U.S. is induced to assimilate to American speech, ideals, traditionals, and ways of life, those kinds of things. Because when we really dissect what we're talking about here, is we're talking about what are some of the things that are values here within our own world here in the U.S., and that's what we're talking about. So those kinds of things, and this is a real discussion, because sometimes some of those people with whom we work within this particular group, they're not Americanizing as simply as some of others of us might have been able to, integrate, if you will. So I think that's a good informational piece. When it comes to bicultural or biculturalism, one of the things I always tell people, especially when I was a clinical director, and I was also I did hiring of people, and they'd oftentimes tell me, well, I'm bilingual, but they would talk about being bilingual and bicultural as one and the same, and I'm here to tell you they're not. Bicultural is living within two cultures or more, but bilingual is about language, and it's not necessarily if you speak a language you have a handle on the culture. So it's a couple of different pieces there, but I just want to make sure that there's understood that it's not synonymous, not at all. But again, navigating within two cultures. I always remember the movie of, not that I base my money or my life on movies, but I would tell you the movie Selena, when they're talking about the navigation of two cultures, the not being Mexican enough or not being American enough, and that's a classic scene. with James Edward Olmos, and I really, really like it because it really does explain how this navigation can work in living within two worlds, if you will. Cultural competence, here we start talking about a number of things, and we're talking about not just, recognizing and responding to these health-related beliefs and cultural values. We're talking about a bunch of things. We're talking about being responsive to the needs of those we serve, how to effectively do the work that we want to do with anyone that's in front of us, and if we have someone that might fall into the Hispanic and Latino group, how do we remain effective? How do we make it so that it's a comfortable place to come or that you want to come? How do we encourage people to disclose or to connect or to trust? How do we put that humanity so that they start really engaging in how we wish they would engage? And I think that that's what we're talking about when we're talking about cultural competence, because it's such an important piece of what we do. So I think that that's something we oftentimes need to look at. When it comes to culture and treatment, there's a lot of considerations and cultural characteristics, and when it comes to drug treatment. And one of the things oftentimes in mental health, when working with Hispanics and Latinos, one of the most common things I've heard, depending on acculturation or assimilation, but is, I'm not crazy. I'm not going to go to a therapist or a psychologist or psychiatrist. And oftentimes the concepts of us as helpers, that's really important for us to pay attention to. And when we're delivering services with regard to drug treatment, regardless of the level it may be, whether it's at the, at the community-based level or office level, you name it. And so I think it's important to take those things into consideration. Again, when it comes to Hispanics and Latinos, the key role is how do we do it to really engage and get involved. It's important to know that we can't afford to let any kind of cultural barriers to get in the way. And I saw that the polling question, and it had a number of things on there. And just to name a couple of them, some of those cultural barriers, as I see them, we're talking about immigration. We're talking about language. We're talking about all those pieces that are just either sometimes not looked at or at least not emphasized. So how do we do it so that we do everything we can to meet the needs of our patients and connect them? And in my role as a monitor, I would oftentimes go into clinics and see if it was warm and welcoming, if it was language receptive, if language was appropriate and respectful, those pieces. And that doesn't mean that we walk in a place and we all hold hands. It means that we walk in a place and it's something of welcoming. It's positive. It's those pieces that are just so important when it comes to culturally competent treatment. One of the things that we oftentimes will talk about are these common themes that come up. And those common themes with regard to Hispanics and Latinos, we talk about familia, respeto, personalismo, confianza, espiritualidad. And for the sake of the presentation, as you can see, family is familia, respeto, they almost look exactly the same. Personal relationships are personalismo, trust is the one that doesn't look like confianza, but it's the same thing. And spirituality, espiritualidad. I'm going to mention a piece of each one of these because they are so important in the work we do. And one of the things when we start talking about family, for example, it's just important to look at every single piece of what we're mentioning when we're saying familismo. And if you look at the word itself and take the O out, it's familism, but it's family. And again, a strong identification with family, attachment to their nuclear and extended families. This is not necessarily true with every Hispanic and Latino family, but I'll tell you what, sometimes depending on if somebody's newly arrived here or been here a while, hasn't connected to their community or what have you, there's a lot of factors that we do when we're starting to know those that we're working with. I oftentimes as a practitioner will do and have done what I call a conocimiento. Conocimiento is a get to know, and that's not just a session where you talk about the weather. That's before I ever do any intake. I do a get to know, and some of it might be some personal stuff, but I'm not writing anything yet. It has to do with, I wonder what the structure of the family is. I wonder how this is going to begin, and look at the dynamics. So that's when you start seeing, hey, I wonder where the family value falls within the family I'm working with at this very second. So those kinds of things, the feelings of loyalty, reciprocity, solidarity among the family are things that I look at. Along the same lines, you know, one of the things that I always look at is I wonder who they connect with, whether it's somebody in the community, but it's usually always going to be somebody within the family structure. I run and I do groups in Spanish, and a lot of times most of the people I work with are Central American and Mexican. I do also serve and have Cuban, Puerto Rican, and South American clients as well. But one of the things I always look at is where do they connect? And usually I almost always find a connection within the family structure. So again, this is a really solid piece in a good foundation and knowing where to begin. You know, traditionally, there's a extended family piece to a lot of the families with whom at least I've worked. But if you start looking at this, you'll see the strong family ties. You look at some of the ways to proceed when it comes to working with Hispanics and Latinos. And again, sometimes you're going to run into dysfunctional families where it may not be healthy to bring the family into the treatment. It may not be that easy or work that well. But many times it will, and including family could be on the table as long as, again, it remains a healthy ambiance, and as practitioners we're open to viewpoints and how to proceed. And again, this is critical. I won't tell you as a rule of thumb, always include family, because again, some situations don't warrant that. When it comes to the flexibility of boundaries and or pathologizing closeness, you know, one of the things I look at my own life, in my own word, one of the things I really always want to make sure is that closeness does not necessarily mean that somebody's enmeshed or that this family has these people that are enabling the person that we're working with, those kinds of things. You know, a lot of it has to do with making it a lot more simple, and sometimes it's taking care of one another. So what we might perceive as enmeshment or enabling might actually be taking care of another person. But that doesn't mean, again, every situation is the same. I always say I have a concept, a construct of how to begin the work, but it's not always exactly the same concept. So I got to look at, okay, I've seen this before, is it or is it not what I think it is? And then I just get more information as I diagnose or as I acquire information so that I can see how to proceed and best serve the individual that I'm working with. Polling question again. I will request Misty help me out with this, and then we'll go. Have you experienced the concept of Familismo with Hispanic or Latino clients during the therapeutic process? Have you experienced the concept of Familismo with Hispanic or Latino clients during the therapeutic process? Okay. And we were just talking about Familismo. Okay, 3/4 of people have, and for the percentage that's I'm not sure. Again, Familismo, we're talking about a concept, and whether it was my explanation or talking about what Familismo is, I think it's just as we continue to talk about this important theme when it comes to Hispanics and Latinos, I think it's really crucial that we look at how that is a piece of who we work with and how we proceed with that. When it comes to respect or respeto, we look at deferring to those in position of authority, and it can be returned or reciprocated as needed. And one of the things that oftentimes I see practitioners of all walks of life do is see themselves in a position of authority and possibly treat others in a manner that may not be perceived as respectful or warm or those kinds of things. So we start talking about, hey, what are some of those things that might be within this group? Might be, okay, so I'm not saying every person, but might be something that is respected. And we oftentimes, I know that depending on a lot of things, but almost in every group will say one of the things to be respected is age, so the elders. And when it comes to language, with elders, especially with the Spanish speaking or Spanish language population, to speak with an elder in usted rather than tú manner is pretty important. Usted is like speaking in English, such as sir and ma'am, whereas tú is very informal and really speaking to a person older than oneself in anything but usted could be a deal breaker, and has been for some people. At least when I used to do a lot of clinical supervision with people that were under with people that were working for me, and a lot of the clinicians would sometimes they might be Chicano or Mexican American, and they wouldn't understand that speaking some Spanish is good, but not being formal and not understanding those nuances could be deal breakers, and sometimes they would definitely find themselves in a negative place in interacting with individuals that didn't perceive that they were respected. So again, language or speech is really such a big deal. Positions of authority. If somebody's within a family structure and let's say it's a grandparent or something like that, that scene is many times as a something to be respected. So those things are important to take into consideration. Again, every situation is different, and the dynamics are something that, as contingent on our skill sets, that we make a determination about. Titles, oftentimes my own experience, I'm referred to as Senor Flores or Mr. Flores when I'm talking, and sometimes I go, hey, it's okay, you don't have to be so formal, but many times a lot of my clients insist on doing that because they see me as being there, and it's very formal, it's very respectful. Or sometimes it's such a big deal to, you don't question somebody in authority. So sometimes depending on who we're working with, and again, acculturation, assimilation play a key role, questioning what the outcome of something is, or what somebody's call on something was, if it's a teacher, if it's a medical doctor, if it's asking questions around it might be seen as impolite or disrespectful, whereas us as practitioners need to understand that could be happening. So I know that one of the other things that I do oftentimes is I ask question and say, so tell me what I just explained, just to make sure that we're talking about the same things. Because if we say, and it happened to me already, I'm telling you, I'm not an expert in this. I'm an expert in mistakes, and I've made all of them. And one of the things I remember with one particular person, didn't speak my language, I said, so did you understand what I said? They said, oh yeah, sure, 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 and they did not understand. And those kind of things are not the most helpful, to ask a question that's so closed and gets you no information. So again, making sure that it is understand. One of the things that I will often put on the table is, hey, tell me what I just said, just to make sure that I kind of put it out there in the correct manner, and so that we're both understanding what we need to do. And that really is helpful. Again, questions and asking questions are so important. So again, a mutual respect is just so important when it comes to those we serve. Personalismo, getting back to being personal, okay? Being personal. I think that that's such a big deal. And again, formal friendliness, simpatía or kindness. Here you'll oftentimes hear things like boy, that person is good people. In Spanish is buena gente, good people. And that means that you got some connection going on. And that means that trust is on the way, those kinds of things. And when it comes to personal relationships, as in with any group, but here, again, we have this name, but it has to do with being genuine, being sincere, being kind, those things. And if it's any of it is not sincere or not genuine, it will definitely be something that comes up and happens and is just right there. So it's just really important to know that people can perceive if somebody's not on the up and up, not genuine. So all I would say is, as practitioners, we're here as people servers, as in the human service field, because I believe that most of us, if not all of us, are helpers. And as helpers, we have some of this kind of built into us. Yeah, we get tired. Yes, we have sometimes burnout and stuff like that. But we're in this field because we're human service soldiers. We're here to help. So one of the things that I always look at is, again, with personal relationships, personalismo. One of my workers one time said, could you wait? I'm across town and the lady is at the bus stop that I have to meet with, and I don't want her to leave. So I said, no, I'm very close. So I stopped by. I stopped and I sat and chatted with her for a while. I kept her there, but I told her, let's wait for the person that was on the way. There was no surprises, but I sat and talked with her for a while, and in 15 minutes, she told me everything. I mean, I wasn't doing an intake, but I was definitely just speaking with the person, but she felt my sincerity, my genuineness, and more than anything, that I was interested. So we sat and talked, and in 15 minutes, I can't tell you how much information I received, so much so that when I finally connected later that day with my worker, we ended up talking about, she did an intake with this individual, and I had major amounts of contributions to her intake from the information that the person had provided for me and offered up and volunteered. So I think those kinds of things are really important when it comes to relationships. You know, I was just talking about providers to be warm, friendly, and personal, and take an interest in the patient's life. Again, when we do these things and we're not genuine, it's obvious. And I know we've seen it when it comes to, we'll just say, salespeople sometimes that aren't genuine. They just want the sale. They just want to get, another sale so that their money can increase to what they're making, or whatever they need to do. And sometimes it's not genuine. It's just about making the sale. And then what we do, it's not about making the sale. It's about serving. And that's what I always pay attention to. Personalismo. This is one of my favorite pieces, personalismo, which actually leads us directly into trust. Trust building, it's not something that just happens. It doesn't happen. It's something upon which it's a foundation, and establishing trust is fundamental to going forward in a relationship. Whether it's therapeutic or not, it's fundamental. And building trust is a process. It definitely isn't something that we just say, okay, trust me because I'm Mexican, It doesn't happen. It won't happen, and it shouldn't happen. If somebody's trusting me because I'm Mexican, that's a problem. So the real deal, and that's great, but it just doesn't happen that easily. I think that the real issue would be what kinds of things do we do in order to create, create trust. And one of the things that I've oftentimes heard, and it's kind of cliche, but we hear it, it's meeting a patient where they're at. Okay, and you say, hey, what does that mean? Well, meeting somebody where they're at means a number of things. In this particular case, it means, respecting a patient's culture and showing, real interest and genuine interest in that person. And a lot of that stuff will get you miles ahead when it comes to trust building, because it's real, and really we want to know. Before I was, I speak Spanish, but I had for a while people that I worked with that were Portuguese, and I really honestly wanted to know more about the language. When I would hear a word, I go, hey, that sounds a lot like so-and-so. So I'd ask questions around the language. I wasn't trying to make small talk. It was real, true interest in knowing the language. And I think that those kinds of things are really, really great to work on. Again, trust building is such a big deal. And again, how do we do it? I think there's a number of ways, and different people have different strategies in order to engage and get in a trusting place with others. Spirituality, I just wanna make sure I put this out there. Not all Hispanic and Latinos would say, hey, I'm very spiritual, or I'm this or that. It doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. We talk about some of them, and to visit this particular issue of spirituality is really, for some, it's an instrument of recovery, for recovery, while, for others it's a protective factor. But I got to tell you, more often than not, depending on where the people I'm working with, where they're at, in terms of acculturation and assimilation, I can tell you how often I hear, que Dios te bendiga, and that's, may God bless you. And I hear that, and that doesn't mean they're spiritual. It means that, hey, I want to visit that particular issue and see how that is part of what we're working toward. So that's the way I kind of pursue that. And again, for some, this is a strong piece, and the faith piece we call fe. Faith is big for some. It's just such a big deal. It's a foundation. How do you integrate this to others? Because I've had people that come to treatment and say, hey, I'm never going to do this again because, God won't let me, or this one. So again, sometimes they might go into this place we call religiosity or what have you. But also, there's a healthy place of how to integrate the spirituality piece and use it as a strength. Not a replacement for stuff we're doing, but rather something that we can work together with. And oftentimes, we'll talk about it, and once that's figured out, it's really great to kind of see how that works. Okay, so a lot of times we'll talk about mainstream medicine, and then we'll say, okay, how do you integrate that to some of the stuff that, the faith that somebody's bringing to the table. And that's such a great thing when it does happen. Which brings me to curanderismo. The verb is curar, which is to cure. And some people, it brings me to curanderismo because part of curanderismo includes faith. It really includes faith. Things such as juramentos or mandas. A juramento is a promise, and a manda is an obligation that's a promise. And you'll see some families will say, yes, I'm walking these 30 miles to this town as a promise to God for having healed me, or to heal so-and-so. But it's all faith, based on faith. And sometimes you'll see these things, and or I'm walking to this particular cathedral and so. In my visits, and I love Mexico City, I've seen people with faith do the mandas, and they'll be on their knees, and they'll tear up their knees, going to the basilica to show their faith and their devotion, and it all has to do with either completing a promise or a manda. It's a beautiful thing, and sometimes it works in treatment. We see it. Sometimes it works in front of us. We see it happening. So that's just something to keep in mind. But curanderismo, it includes a lot of things. It includes prayer, faith, herbal medications, spiritualism, massage, psychic healing. Sometimes you hear the different, it depends on where you are in the country, but you have here, for example, in Arizona, California, Texas, New Mexico, you hear things like hierberos. That's an herbalist, a hierbero. You have places around the city where I live, you have places called hierberias, and that's where they have herbs, and they have natural remedies for a lot of things, whether it's for nerves, whether it's for anxiety, depression. There's different things, remedies, herbal remedies out there, and that's a hierbero. So this is part of being a curandero, or a person that cures. And massage, you have sobadores. They're not chiropractors, they're sobadores, and it's like a chiropractor, but usually they're indigenous. Usually indigenous, whether Ya, Quito, Hono, you name it, Seri, and they're indigenous, and they massage people in a way that's spiritual. But we'll see those kinds of things, and so that when we talk about this folk healing and stuff like that, and we're talking about curanderismo, but again, if you hear this, sometimes you'll never hear this, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard it where somebody says, hey, you know what, I know why so-and-so happened to me. I think somebody cast a spell on me. And I'll say, okay, so I know that for any spell that may be cast upon you, there's a limpia, or a cleansing, that a curandero does, a healer does. And I'll ask, did they do that? And there's a whole process for which, and even if I didn't know, I would ask, so what do you do when you get a cast? And they would tell you, you go to a curandero and they do a cleansing. So those kinds of things are just really important to just put in front of you. Again, we're talking about all this stuff in an hour and a half, and I'm talking that we extrapolated all the things we're talking about from a 2-day training that even is not enough. Because we go around the U.S. with the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC talking about these things and making sure that this is a good starting point for practitioners. So we're talking about a 16-hour training that we do when it comes to this. These kinds of issues. So curanderismo is just such a something we need to keep in mind when we do come across it. Again, spirituality, again, provide structures in the mainstream medicine, and we're talking about physical and mental health care. And again, there's a holistic approach to this. I just explained how sometimes we have curanderismo, or that spiritual piece, as part of treatment, and how to integrate that. And as you can see, even the slide itself, you have faith, beliefs, wisdom, all those pieces that are just part of the slide. But spirituality plays a big role in a lot of the lives of the people we serve. And again, even if that's not the case, that's a place you can definitely visit and see if it does or if it doesn't. Again, other cultural-related issues and treatment, I just mentioned immigration, family difficulties, gender roles, language selection and recovery, adolescence, LGBTQ. You know, when we start talking about each of these individually, we start looking at how they impact the things that are important. And one of the things that I oftentimes look at when it comes to immigration, because again, as I mentioned, I am an immigrant, and one of the things that I would always remember is the fear of coming into contact with the Border Patrol here in our area, even though we had what it was called green cards. And that just makes me think, I wonder what that fear looks like for those that do not have the documentation, and how that impacts the way they seek services. So I oftentimes think about those kinds of things. And if somebody does come in my direction that has some immigration status that they're working on and stuff like that. I just wonder how, what's going on, and I'm really glad that they got in to treatment. So again, immigration has so much to do, because we're not just talking about undocumented folks. We're talking about people that are newly immigrated to a place. So not everybody's undocumented, and that's another thing. There's a lot of stereotypes around immigration that people are not documented or don't have the necessary paperwork to be in the country. Again, an immigrant is somebody that is newly in another place. It's not necessarily talking about somebody's legal status, but that's definitely something that we can visit. Family difficulties. A little while ago we were talking about how do you include the family in treatment and how you do that piece. Again, with regard to Hispanics and Latinos, sometimes you're talking about intergenerational conflicts. You're talking about, for example, some families that are newly arrived in a certain place, and the kids, they have no idea where their parents, how their parents function, where they were born and raised, and then all of a sudden they're in a new country and the kids are raised here. Right there already you have a disconnect in two different cultures. You have youngsters sometimes that might not even speak the language, might not even speak Spanish and communicate well with their parents, and as a result are over here navigating the American culture and really are moving toward more assimilation than anything else. So sometimes there's a lot of those kinds of conflicts and generational differences. Again, there's also family neglect and physical abuse. When it comes to this particular group, not just because it's a very private group, but more than that, it's a group where if you have somebody, we'll just go back to immigration or even this group, that may not report something because of their status in terms of immigration, something that goes unreported. That's just same thing with domestic violence and sex abuse. That's a really prevalent thing. And according to NCIC stats, violence with regard to the Hispanic and Latino group, especially undocumented, goes unreported. And we are talking about physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. We're talking about that specifically. That's a very underreported crime. So that means that there's a lot of trauma within this group. So that's something that keep in your mind when working with particular people. Latino analysis and substance abuse. Again, I talked about the acculturation gaps and what that looks like, and sometimes what it sounds like, because sometimes you have parents that go into something and they're using their children as interpreters, which sometimes that sets the stage for miscommunication. It sets the stage for negligence, because putting a child in an adult role to interact is not just negative. It can be a real stressor for the child, and if miscommunication occurs, who knows how much more information could be missed. I was one of those children that would do those kinds of things, so I know the damage and the trauma it can be for both sides. So trauma and stress in schools and communities is not something that's uncommon. It's definitely something that's out there. And so when people come in the door and they say, here's what's happened in public school, here's what's happened, then it's just a matter of listening and saying, how can I pick up this information and really go from there? What is the important piece of what we're talking about, and what is what I really need to focus on? Gender roles, again, we're going to talk a little bit about machismo and marianismo in a little while, but nevertheless, again, we start talking about how to, those pieces, stereotypes, stigmatization of women, isolation, what are the things, what's more permitted for males than females? What are some of the things that are expectations around females than males? So those kinds of things are things we just start throwing around. So gender roles play a major role in what we're talking about. I said about Marianismo, but I'll call it here according to the slide, motherhood and associated roles. You know, self-sacrifice. The mother on behalf of her children. I'll do anything for my child. And so you start seeing some of these things. And I know that oftentimes people with whom I've been associated would kind of look at us and say, yeah, boy, your mom is sure important to you guys. And because my brother and I worked together, and we would definitely agree with them. And they say, boy, you guys are sure mama's boys. And even though I would not disagree with that, my mom's not around anymore, but I would not disagree with that. I would say, well, yeah, we take care of our mom, and yes, we have her at what is called a sacred status. And that was part of what we definitely did, knowing that our mother in our head and everything else self-sacrificed for us. So those kinds of things are just such a big deal for some of the people that we serve within the Hispanic and Latino group. It's just, you know, which brings me to machismo. You know, machismo, as soon as I hear this word, or when we're talking about this word when we're doing training, we hear the word machismo, and we go into this negative connotation place. And with machismo, there's some things that we can actually draw from, or at least extrapolate from, and make it so that this is a strength more than anything. Because with machismo, yes, there is distinction between the sexes, and we oftentimes, the connotations associated with it are control, power, negativity. Well, if we switch that around, you know, we start looking at the pieces of machismo, such as being conducting oneself in a dignified manner, respecting others, really being there for somebody if they need it, but knowing your role. Hey, in the home, this is what I do. It's not a control thing, but this is what I've been assigned. I fix the cars. I do this. So those kinds of things. Again, part of it is gender roles. Part of it could be, but that machismo, gender-specific value that applies to Hispanics, refers to a man's responsibility to provide for, protect, and defend his family. You know, those pieces, you could say, well, that's just a guy. Well, I would say sometimes it's also can be and fall under the construct of machismo, but for the most part, you know, just putting it out there and asking about those kinds of things. Because again, even as a practitioner, if somebody comes up with the word machismo, I right away go, I wonder where that's at. Or if they say somebody is machista, I'll hear the first thing I'm hearing is this person is controlling. So just pay attention to that and how either we can work with that, or if it's not a controlling piece, what is meant by it. So that's just visiting that area of who we're working with. And here are the next polling questions. Have you experienced the concept of machismo with Hispanic or Latino clients during the therapeutic process? Yes, no, I'm not sure. Three quarters of the folks out there have definitely experienced that. And I got to tell you, for those that have experienced it, for some of us, it's a learning process. For others of us, it's more of a, okay, I know what to do right here. So again, that's a lot of information. So 3/4 of people have experienced it. And I'm going to put I think I'd put money on that sometimes in most of us when we've experienced it, it's pretty been, it might have been in a negative place, in a negative concept. So that's one of the things that's really something we can figure out. LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning. You know, 17% of LGBTQ Americans are Hispanic. That's a pretty significant number. And again, depending on assimilation and acculturation, you know, acceptance increases through immigrant generations is what it said. Well, you know, it's really interesting because what you're seeing is a real shift. And even in Mexico, you're seeing more and more LGBTQ population, not necessarily openness in the larger cities. So that's something that's pretty interesting. And again, immigration and homophobia, we run across a lot of this stuff, and how that impacts those we work with. So this is definitely something that either can be a barrier or again, a trust issue. How do you work with somebody that's got this issue and they're really struggling with either coming out or doing something and addressing their substance abuse issues, and but this is an issue that they don't want to put on their table because their traditional family won't understand those kinds of things. That's a big deal. That's a big issue, and that's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety as well. You know, language selection and recovery. This, you know, I oftentimes look at this, and when it comes to this particular issue of language, you know, it falls under a bunch of pieces, and whether it's if you're in the school realm, ELL, English language learner, or if you're in the healthcare, limited English proficiency, LEP, or if you're in the census, linguistic isolation. See, those kinds of things are what we're talking about when we're talking about language selection. And when we start talking about the CLAS standards, like a little while ago we were, one of the things we start looking at is our language needs being met. Some people might say, and I heard this many a times, hey, you're in the U.S., speak English. And I would say, yes, I do speak English. And also there's people that speak Spanish. And again, how do we serve those when the language that would best serve them is not necessarily out there? So there's a lot of options in terms of interpreters, translators, telephonic interpreters, in person, and you know, there's so many options out there now that are being put on the table. And I think that's when we start talking about language selection and recovery. There's a lot of guys that I work with that would prefer to work in Spanish, even though they know both languages, they're bilingual, but they prefer Spanish because they feel they can express themselves emotionally much better in Spanish than in English. So that's kind of a very key piece when we're talking about how to serve those that we work with well. So I think that's something. Again, culturally competent treatment services. We'll start talking about those kinds of things that are, you could say, oh, that's so simple. Involve family members, show respect, get personal. We just said all these too, traditional healing approaches. And the main one that I always look at is encourage the asking of questions. Again, remember what we said, sometimes within this group people think, I'm not going to ask anything, but it's kind of disrespectful. It's like questioning that person, and I don't think I should do that. Well, I would encourage it always. Why? Because I want to make sure that what we're talking about is very clear, so make sure there's no mistakes. And even then, it can be sometimes we might run up to some challenges. Again, involving family members. Not 100% of the time is it going to be always involve family members, but more often than not, you'll encounter that involving family members is a helpful piece when it comes to decision making and identifying the key persons in that family structure. In addition, respect, that's a given. That's an easy thing to just say, okay, am I going to be respected just because my name is Flores? Am I going to be respected because they really trust bald guys? Nothing like that. Respect is a process. Respect is how do we engage those that we want them to really get engaged? How do we engage them and do it in a way that's respectful and they feel a piece of the process? And that's really important. Personal, again, we talked about this. The salesman or the salesperson approach of let me just get the sale, it's rare that something like that will work. It's very positive when somebody is genuine and truly interested in you. And again, here it says lean forward, be comforting, use gestures. Well, this is a good rule of thumb, but I think each situation is unique, and just understand how through our skill sets we determine which ones are best. Traditional healing practices, I could have easily told somebody that says, hey, I have a spell on me, that's why I did what I did. I could have easily told somebody, hey, no, you did what you did because you were this and you were that. And I could have said that. And that was the approach that many people had to that individual I mentioned a little while ago. And that's why they never connected with this individual. As a result, this individual did start doing real work until he got to me, and I kind of heard him out and said, okay, tell me about that spell and what you did about it. So again, respecting traditional healing practices. If somebody says, hey, I go to this healer, this guy that kind of gives me this massage, he's a Salvador, he's a Yaqui from the Yaqui tribe, and he gives these massages, and that really helps me. I'll say, oh, that's great. How does it help you? And he'll explain it, and I'll say, okay, let's see. How do we make that part of what we're working with? I think that's respecting traditional healing practices. Again, I'll tell you, encourage the asking of questions. This is the biggest piece that I ever run across. Ask. And that's even us. We ask questions. If you don't understand something, we're not all knowing. We can ask questions. And if we ask questions, we'll get more information. Remember the example I gave you around not knowing a language and saying, hey, that word sounds like so-and-so in Spanish. Is that what it means? That's asking questions. And that's me being genuinely interested. It's not me coming up with something to engage them and saying, I'll just try to engage them with something. So again, if you encourage asking questions of you, you can also ask questions of others, and they'll see, hey, this is important enough that he's asking about us. Remember the themes, the common themes: personalismo, espiritualidad, respeto. All those pieces are such a big piece of what we've been talking about. So just remember, confianza, all those, they're just such a big deal. By addressing these themes, we can increase the way we work with Hispanics and Latinos, but increase the way we are in terms of what we really want to do is help. So that's really going to help us out, and we can really look at the different cultural circumstances and different pieces that'll help us to kind of figure out, hey, in which direction do I want to go with this particular situation based on some of those cultural pieces that we've acquired during our interaction. And that doesn't mean that in one intake session you get everything. That means that you get to know the person you're working with, and little by little you're going to be rolling in more information that's going to help you to really get to working well with different people and helping them the way it's the way intended. Part of just I want to thank everybody for really getting this information, because I know that as helpers we want to increase not just our skill sets, but we want information that's going to help us do what we intended to do when we entered the field. Whether we've been in this field 1 year or whether we've been in the field 45 years, it doesn't matter. I think that we're all in a learning place, and I know I am. I can't tell you how often I'll go to a training, and sometimes I go to see what I can take that I can use for what I do, or some of the things that I say to myself, it's really just going over some of the stuff I already have, or in other instances it's looking at what somebody might be talking about that just can help me on not just a training level, but also on a practitioner, personal level. So those things are just such a big deal, such a huge deal in general. I want to make a quick plug here. We have a conference with the National Hispanic and Latino ATTC coming up in October. That's October 8th and 9th. And I just want to tell you that's in Austin, Texas. And if you get on our website, you'll see all the information. We have dynamite presenters, and I recommend that if you're able to attend such an event, I recommend that you do it. We have incredible trainers, or if you will, presenters there from all over the nation, and it is a national conference. It's our first one, actually, our first national conference, and we have representation from SAMHSA, from Office of Minority Health. We have representation from many places, but also from individuals that are just cutting edge when it comes to doing the work with Hispanics and Latinos throughout the U.S. So I just want to say, please, if you get an opportunity to attend, I highly recommend it. So if you want to take it from there, Misty.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Victor. I just want to echo what you were saying about the work as Hispanic, National Hispanic and Latino ATTC. As you can see on your screen, there's also some contact information if you're not able to attend this event in October, but you want to get in contact with the ATTC. There is so much information on their website, and they're doing really great work, so please continue to support them and think of them when you have topics that would be relevant to them. So thanks for that, and thank you, Victor, for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, some participants have already submitted some questions, so thank you for those, and we'll make sure and provide all of your answers to all of your questions on our website. Just to be respectful of Victor's donated time, please allow us a few weeks to get those questions answered and posted. We do have several upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you, such as assessment of sexual and cybersex addiction, and also a gambling disorder, the assessment and treatment strategies, just to name a few of upcoming webinars. You can register for all these events at www.nadac.org/webinars. And in case you missed one of our previously broadcasted webinars, we have all of them that are archived for free viewing at your convenience. They're all on demand, so you can see a bunch of topics listed up there, just main topic headings. But we have over 75 hours of education that you can access for free online. You don't even have to be a member to watch them, but if you are a member, you get free CEs for all of that time. So look into that as well at www.nadac.org/join. There are many more educational opportunities and resources that are available on our website, nadac.org, including free online courses, face-to-face seminars, independent study courses. And I encourage you to just set aside some time and browse and just take advantage of all we have to offer to you there. And just one more time briefly for our latecomers, if you wish to receive CE credit for participating, you must pass the online CE quiz that is located at nadac.org/cultural humility Hispanic Latino. Certificates are free to NADAC members, otherwise they're $20. This applies to those who are logged in today for the live presentation and those that are watching the on-demand version. If you did not get all of your questions answered on this topic, you're welcome to contact myself or Victor through the contact information that's on your screen. I also encourage you to join the NADAC online community at Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, when you close this viewing window for the live webinar, a new window will automatically pop up where you can have the opportunity to provide us with some feedback about the webinar series. Please just take a few moments to help us either improve or maybe praise our wonderful presenter today. Again, thanks so much, Victor, and thank you all for joining us today. I will conclude today's webinar, and I hope you have a great day.